Hello, my name is John Miller. For years, my family laughed at me, mocked me for driving an old rusted truck like I was some kind of failure. They called it junk. They called me worthless. But what they didn't know was that the truck held more than dents and broken glass. It held secrets, service, and a past I never shared. The night they jeered the loudest, a Navy chopper descended from the sky, and for the first time, they saw who I really was. Do you want to know why that helicopter came for me and what it revealed about everything they thought they knew? I pulled my old pickup into my parents' driveway and killed the engine. The truck gave its usual cough before falling silent. The house was already crowded. Shiny new cars lined the curb, polished so bright they could blind you under the summer sun. My truck sat among them like an old soldier at a parade he didn't belong to. I stepped out, feeling the rust on the door handle scrape my hand. My younger brother, standing near the grill with a beer in his hand, smirked immediately. "Man, John, I thought they retired these things back in the 90s, he said loud enough for the nieces and nephews to hear. They laughed, their little voices chiming like bells, but sharp enough to cut. I kept my jaw tight and carried the pie I'd baked toward the porch. My mother glanced at the truck, shook her head and sighed. "John, why don't you ever think of upgrading? You're not a boy anymore." Inside, the smell of barbecue filled the air. Everyone had a plate, everyone had a story. I sat at the table, trying to join in, but the jokes about my rust bucket never stopped. My M-Doe leaned across the table, smiling sweetly as she said, "It must be tough, driving something that screams failure everywhere you go." She tapped her manicured nails on the rim of her glass. "Kind of like your personal life." My stomach tightened. I wanted to fire back, but I just swallowed hard. I stared at the food on my plate, narrating the thoughts I could never say out loud. I'd been halfway across the world, wearing a uniform, living on cots, surviving on rations, while they were here buying new cars and mocking the old one I still drove. The noise of their laughter faded in my ears as a memory took hold. I was back in the Navy, sweat running down my neck as I hauled equipment in 100-degree heat. Nights with barely 4 hours of sleep. Mornings that started before the sun. Discipline, honor, endurance. Those things had been my life. I had stood under foreign skies while artillery cracked in the distance, thinking of this very family. I had believed foolishly that they would be proud. But sitting at that table, I saw the truth clearly. They didn't care about my service, my years, or the sacrifices. They cared about shiny paint and leather seats. To them, worth was measured by possessions, not by scars or medals. I pushed back my chair and excused myself. Outside, I leaned against my truck. The metal was warm under my palm, worn but solid, like me. I tilted my head back, staring at the fading orange sky. For a moment, I wondered if coming home had been a mistake. The battles here cut deeper than any I'd fought overseas. Then I heard it, the faint chop of rotor blades. At first, I thought I imagined it, but the sound grew louder, undeniable, rattling through the air. My family trickled out onto the porch, shading their eyes. Confusion spread across their faces. I didn't need to see it to know. That rhythm of the blades, steady and commanding, I'd know it anywhere. A Navy helicopter hovering right above my parents' backyard, and in that moment every cruel word they'd spoken, every laugh at my expense, froze in their throats. They stood there in stunned silence, and for the first time all afternoon, I didn't feel small. And as the Navy chopper hovered into view above my parents' backyard, every mocking word they'd thrown at me turned to stunned silence. The blades thundered above us, chopping through the quiet Ohio evening like a war drum. My whole family froze, faces turned skyward, mouths hanging open. The kids squealed, half terrified, half thrilled, while my mother clutched her apron as if that thin fabric could shield her from the force shaking the backyard. Neighbors spilled onto their porches, hands shading their eyes, murmurs rising with the whirling dust. And there I stood, feet planted in the grass, watching the Navy descend into my family's cookout. I should have felt only pride, hearing that familiar roar, but shame burr. The helicopter lowered into the open field across the fence line, trees whipping back, paper plates and napkins flying from our picnic table. My nieces shrieked as their soda cups tumbled. My mother shouted for everyone to cover their faces. My younger brother bent low, muttering a curse he thought no one could ha. The chopper's landing shook the ground beneath us, a storm of dust and power. This wasn't C. A tall figure stepped out, crisp navy uniform catching the last light of evening. Metals gleamed against his chest as he raised his voice above the deafening rotors. "John Miller!" The sound of my name snapped the world into silence. My mother's hand flew to her chest. My nieces stopped giggling. My younger brother straightened, but the officer I felt every stare on my back as I stepped forward. For years they laughed at my beat-up truck, my empty bank account, my failed marriage, and now, here was a Navy officer, decorated and commanding, calling me by name in front of them all. Pride swelled, but dread lurked too. What could this mean? Why here? Why now? My younger brother forced a laugh, loud and nervous, clapping his hands together. "Well, looks like they finally came for you, huh, John? Guess you couldn't outrun it forever." His voice cracked under. The officer's boots crunched across the field until he stood before me. Dust swirled around his legs as he spoke with urgency. "You're needed immediately. There's no time for explanation." Gasps rippled through my family. My mother whispered my name like a prayer. My MDO pulled the kids closer, as if my summons meant danger for everyone. My younger brother said nothing now, jaw tight. Eyes I squared my shoulders, stepped forward, and climbed into the chopper. As the door slammed shut behind me, the last thing I saw was their stunned faces shrinking in the blur of wind and light. As I climbed into the Navy chopper, I didn't know if I was heading toward redemption or ruin. The helicopter roared as it lifted off, rattling every window in my parents' neighborhood. Through the scratched window glass, I caught one last look at my family standing frozen in the yard. My mom's hand was still pressed to her mouth, my younger brother stood slack-jawed, and my nieces clutched their dad's legs as if the noise might carry them away. A few minutes ago, they were laughing at me and my beat-up truck. Now they watched in stunned silence as a Navy chopper carried me into the sky. The houses shrank into neat rows below, the backyard barbecue smoke fading into a blur. I felt something I hadn't in years, a strange, vindicated pride. Yet it was tangled with dread because I had no idea why they wanted me. Was this some kind of disciplinary action, or had I been dragged into a nightmare I didn't see coming? Inside, the noise was constant, rotors beating like war drums, headsets buzzing with clipped static. The officer who had summoned me sat stiff beside me. He hadn't offered a handshake, not even a nod. His eyes were locked forward, focused, as if small talk would break military code. I pressed the headset tighter over my ears and leaned back against the vibrating seat. The rhythm of the machine was familiar and foreign all at once. It reminded me of deployments, of nights when we flew into places I don't talk about, places where you either returned whole or didn't return at all. I wanted to demand answers, but the words stuck in my throat. Finally, the officer leaned toward me, his voice sharp through the headset. "You're not in trouble, Miller. We need you." The words hit harder than any reprimand could have. Not in trouble. We need you. My gut clenched. I had braced myself for shame, for a reminder of mistakes, but instead, they were pulling me back as if I still mattered. I swallowed hard. Need me for what? I've been out for years. I'm just a logistics guy in Ohio now. He didn't blink. This isn't about who you are now. It's about what you did then. Intelligence work you handled overseas. There's unfinished business. A chill spread through me. And that chapter of my life, I thought it was closed. Those missions were buried in reports, locked in steel cabinets I'd never see again, but his words pried them open, dragging ghosts back into the light. I thought of why I left the Navy, exhaustion, shame, the weight of things no one at home could understand. I had convinced myself that quitting meant peace, but peace had never come. Now here I was, strapped into a vibrating seat, heading east, being told my past wasn't just alive, it was needed. The officer's voice dropped lower, as if even inside the chopper walls it was too dangerous to say aloud. There's a vulnerability in our systems, a weakness tied to a mission you were on. You're the only one who still holds the details. Without it, we can't close the gap. My chest tightened. I shook my head. That was years ago. I didn't think. He cut me off. You remember more than you realize. And right now that memory could mean national security. I stared at the instrument panel, the green lights blinking in rhythm with my pulse. The thought that I, a man my own family mocked minutes earlier, might hold answers no one else in the Navy possessed. It was almost absurd. Yet I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me, heavier than the body armor I used to wear. Outside the window, the horizon shifted from farmland to a faint shimmer of coastline. Lights dotted the shore, the outline of a Navy installation waiting below. The helicopter began its descent, tilting forward, the ocean wind buffeting the frame. I gripped the edge of my seat, heart hammering. My family's voices, their laughter and scorn, were gone. Ahead of me lay something darker, sharper, a truth I had tried to bury. The past I thought I had buried was waiting for me on that landing pad. The rotor wash hit me first, gritty wind, the smell of salt and jet fuel slamming into my lungs as the helicopter lowered into the landing pad. Floodlights carved through the night, scattering long shadows across the coastal base. For a moment, I almost forgot I was John Miller, the man who'd walked away from uniforms and commands. Standing there, stiff-backed against the gale, I felt like the Navy had never let me go. As my boots touched the tarmac, soldiers were already waiting, their postures sharp, their faces unreadable under the white glare. No cheers, no small talk, just silent efficiency. One of them motioned me forward with a clipped gesture. I followed, trying to hide the unease pounding in my chest. Behind me, the chopper blades slowed, but their echoes seemed lodged inside my skull. Walking through the double steel doors into the main building, I caught the brief salutes, the subtle nods. They weren't for me, not really. They were for the uniform I wasn't wearing anymore, for the fragments of authority I once carried. Still, every acknowledgement twisted me tighter inside. Respect and suspicion. Two sides of the same coin, and I wasn't sure which one I deserved. Then I saw him. Commander Harris. Even under harsh fluorescent light, he looked the same as the last time I saw his face across a mission table. Stern jaw, eyes sharp like he'd been waiting for me to walk into his office all these years. My gut tightened. Harris had never trusted me. He'd questioned my calls, challenged my instincts, treated me like a liability hiding behind medals. And now here he was, running this base, holding all the cards. "Miller," he said, voice clipped, every syllable a judgment. "Commander?" I answered, steady as I could. My little brother would have said I sounded defiant, maybe reckless, but I wasn't about to give Harris the satisfaction of seeing me shaken. They led me into a briefing room, walls humming with classified silence. Screens flickered to life, maps painted in red zones and digital overlays. A handful of officers lingered near the edges, but no one spoke. Harris stayed at the head of the table, eyes fixed on me like he was waiting for me to crack. Then came the hammer blow. Harris leaned forward, voice low but unyielding. "This isn't about bringing you back in chains. It's about something you left behind." I frowned. "Left behind?" "A covert op you were part of," he continued. "Buried, classified, forgotten by most, but not by the ones who are digging it back up. Something you dismissed years ago is now threatening to burn us all." The words hit harder than the floodlights outside. My mind rifled through years of deployments, scars I thought had scabbed over. And then it landed, the vulnerability, the loophole we all agreed was small, unimportant, a ghost better left buried. Only now it wasn't buried. I stared at the files glowing on the table, the maps with their bleeding red markers, the evidence of something clawing its way out of the past. And Harris, damn him, was right. I was tied to it, whether I wanted to be or not. He leaned closer, his voice like steel. "You can walk away, Miller." Again. "But if you do, this breach will eat through more than just classified paper. It'll cost lives." The silence in that room was suffocating. My little brother's voice echoed in my head, mocking, doubtful, reminding me I'd never outrun my mistakes. I clenched my fists, my jaw, every part of me resisting the pull of that old world. But Harris had left me no space to breathe. I lowered my eyes to the files again, the past staring back at me like a wound torn open. I had walked away once, but this time, Walking away might mean losing more than I could bear. I sat alone in the dim Navy quarters, a room that smelled faintly of oil and salt, its walls bare except for a clock ticking too loudly. On the chair across from me lay the uniform they had issued, a freshly pressed set of blues, folded with surgical precision. I hadn't worn one in years. Just looking at it made my stomach twist. That fabric carried every mistake, every ghost, every failure I thought I'd buried. I rubbed my temples, remembering the sound of my family's laughter not long ago when I stood in their dining room, the butt of their jokes. Now I was here, under military lights, wanted again, but not for who I'd become, for what I once was. A part of me longed to turn my back on it, to walk out, to remind them all I was finished. But another part, quieter, older, told me I couldn't. A sharp knock at the door ended the war in my head. "Miller, they're waiting," a young lieutenant barked. I followed him down sterile corridors, every step echoing on the tile. The base was alive despite the late hour. Screens flickered in side rooms, analysts hunched over maps, printers hummed with urgency. I was an outsider walking through a hive that suddenly needed me. Eyes followed me, not with suspicion, but with expectation. They were counting on me, and that burden was heavier than chains. The conference hall was a cavern of steel and light. Maps sprawled across digital displays, red lines pulsing like veins. At the center stood Commander Harris, the man who had doubted me before, the one whose voice still haunted me in memory. He didn't greet me with warmth. He didn't need to. "You still have the nerve for this, Miller?" he asked, words sharp as blades. I clenched my jaw. Nerve was never the problem. Trust was. His eyes narrowed. The air thickened between us, and for a moment I felt like I was back in uniform, standing at attention, every instinct screaming to fight back. But then he gestured, and the screens shifted. Classified files unfolded, details from an old deployment I'd tried hard to forget, coordinates, mission notes, coded exchanges. My pulse kicked up as I realized what I was looking at. Twist S9 hit me like a gut punch. This crisis wasn't random, it was the direct consequence of a choice I had made years ago. Back then, I'd filed a report that seemed trivial, a vulnerability I'd marked as contained. Now it had spread like fire through dry grass. The fallout traced back to me. My chest tightened, shame fighting with fury. The ghosts I thought I'd buried hadn't died, they'd been waiting, but the worst was still coming. Another folder slid across the screen, stamped with red clearance. Inside, a buried intercept, encrypted chatter from the other side. At first, I thought I was misreading, but no. Twist S10. A name appeared, a civilian address in Virginia, one tied to my family. I froze. My throat dried out as if the air had been sucked from the room. My family. The same family who mocked me, dismissed me, erased me. How the hell could they be linked to this? Was it a coincidence? Or had someone put them in the crosshairs on purpose? Every wall inside me cracked. Duty and bloodlines had collided in the ugliest way. I looked at Harris. His jaw was stone, his stare unflinching. "You see now," he said quietly, "this isn't just about the Navy. It's about you." For a long moment I wanted to bolt, to scream, to vanish. But deep inside, the truth had already settled. There was no walking away, not now, not when the stakes had wormed their way into my own blood. I straightened, my voice steady even as my insides roared. "I'll do it. I'll take the mission. But before this ends, I'll find out why my family's name is in those files." The room was silent. The maps glowed red and white, throwing shadows across my face. I clenched my fists, the weight of both duty and blood crushing me, reshaping me. I wasn't just rejoining for the Navy anymore. I was fighting for something far more dangerous. I wasn't just fighting for the Navy anymore. I was fighting to protect the very people who never believed in me. The alarm on my bunk rattled me awake long before the sun had climbed above the horizon. My uniform, pressed the night before, hung neatly on the chair like a silent dare. I slid into it slowly, fingers stiff against the fabric. The smell of starch was sharp, sterile, a reminder of discipline that once came second nature to me. Outside, the air was cool, the first hints of dawn stretching across the naval base. I walked toward the training grounds, boots echoing against the asphalt. Younger recruits filled the yard, their laughter thin, nervous, eager to prove themselves. Watching them was like staring into a mirror from decades ago, a boy with too much pride and not enough wisdom. My chest tightened. Did I still belong here? Or was I clinging to a name and rank that meant less to the world with every passing year? By the time Commander Harris strode onto the field, silence swept through the recruits like a tide pulling back to sea. He didn't waste words. Exercises started immediately. I was shoved into the front row as if to put me on display. Harris's eyes lingered on me longer than necessary, a silent challenge. The first drills were brutal. Sprinting through obstacle courses, scaling walls slick with dew, crawling under barbed wire that snagged at my sleeves. My lungs burned. My muscles, once trained for endurance, screamed with rust. Harris barked at me twice as often as he did the others. I caught a few smirks from the recruits, Old Man Miller struggling to keep up. But instinct is a stubborn thing. Step after step, breath after breath, my body began to remember. The rhythm returned, faint but steady. My arms moved with mechanical precision, my boots dug into the earth with conviction. And the smirks faded. They still doubted, but I could feel a shift. Later, during a break, I was introduced to my small unit. 4 sailors, all younger, their faces sharp with skepticism. They sized me up quickly. One of them muttered under his breath, "Washed up vet." I ignored it. Family had already carved that word into my skin years ago. What did it matter if strangers tried the same? Then, without fanfare, one of them, Martinez, the youngest, offered me his canteen. "Good run, sir," he said, eyes lowered. It was nothing. But it was also everything. Respect, even in the smallest form, carried weight heavier than steel. The next exercise was capture the flag, a simulation, but Harris had arranged it like combat. Smoke bombs, mock rifles, even enemy units in disguise. We pushed forward through brush and sandbags, the air filled with shouting and the dull pop of blank rounds. I closed in on one of the opposing fighters, tackled him hard, and pinned him. That's when I saw it. On the sleeve of his uniform, crudely stitched but unmistakable, was a symbol, a crest shaped like an angular flame, encircling 3 letters. My blood ran cold. I knew that mark. I had seen it once, hidden in an old ledger my father kept, something he dismissed as business insignia. It had no place here, yet here it was, sewn into the fabric of a simulated enemy. My grip on the recruit's collar tightened. The world blurred for a second. Coincidence? No. The Navy didn't pick random symbols for drills. Someone wanted me to see this. Someone wanted me to know my family's shadow had seeped into this mission. "On your feet, Miller!" Harris's bark jolted me. I shoved the recruit away and rose, my heart pounding against my ribs like a war drum. Training had just become personal. The next round pushed me into command. Harris stood back, arms crossed, daring me to fail. My unit looked uncertain, waiting for orders. My voice, rough at first, found its edge. I directed them through the course, called for cover fire, repositioned under fire. Years of instinct surged back like a tide breaking free of the shore. We finished the drill faster than expected. Harris didn't smile, but his nod was almost enough. The recruits, even the skeptics, glanced at me differently now. Not admiration, not yet, but acknowledgement. And acknowledgement was the first crack in the wall of doubt. Just as my lungs began to steady, the sirens screamed. This time it wasn't part of the drill. Red lights flared across the compound. Harris snapped into motion, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Security breach, coastal perimeter, all units deploy now." Recruits scrambled, dropping training rifles for live ones. Harris's gaze cut to me. "You're in it, Miller. No time for hesitation." My stomach dropped. This wasn't training anymore. The salt wind from the bay carried a different weight. Real danger, real stakes. My boots hit the tarmac as I followed the others to the chopper. The blades spun faster, whipping the air into a frenzy. As I strapped in, the insignia burned in my mind, carved deep into my thoughts. The family tie wasn't just a rumor anymore. It was woven into the fabric of whatever we were about to face. The helicopter lifted off, the base shrinking below us. I gripped my rifle, breath steadying as the coastline stretched out ahead. This wasn't a simulation, and for the first time in years, I was back in the fight. I could feel the vibrations of the chopper long before my boots left the ground. The hangar was chaos, orders shouted, boots slamming metal ramps, the staccato whine of blades accelerating overhead. I hauled myself into the bird, strapped the harness across my chest, and tried to quiet the pounding in my ears. I wasn't sure if it was the machine or my own blood. The recruit sat across from me, too young to have seen the world break in front of them. Their eyes were darting, hands restless against their rifles. Some wore determination like armor. Others couldn't hide the pale edge of fear. I knew both feelings well. Harris climbed aboard last, barking a rushed briefing over the roar. Breach along the coastal grid. Limited intel. Expect contact. I had once been laughed at for driving a rusted truck to town, written off as a man who'd already burned out his worth. And yet, here I was again, strapped into navy steel, blades churning the night, heading straight for another test I hadn't asked for. The ride was long enough for the memories to claw at me. I focused on the sound, the repetitive thunder of blades, the smell of salt riding heavy through the night air, the vibrations rattling my bones. It was familiar, almost comforting, except for the gnawing truth. I wasn't 20 anymore. Responsibility sat on my shoulders like lead, not adrenaline. We dropped fast into the coastal zone. From above, the outpost looked fractured, lights blinking erratically as if the base itself was losing its breath. When my boots hit the ground, silence struck sharper than any drill. No shouts, no engines, no normal base hum, just flickers of light and the ocean beating against the rocks below. "Teams split," Harris ordered. His voice was crisp, steady, but there was no mistaking the tightness in his jaw. "Miller, you take Unit 2. I nodded, motioning for the recruits to follow. They hesitated, just a second, but I caught it. Their eyes said what their mouths didn't. Why him? Why the old man? That doubt echoed the same chorus I'd heard from my own blood for years. I swallowed it and pushed forward. Inside the control hub, the air smelled wrong. Burnt plastic, copper, and salt fused into a metallic stench. Consoles flickered in jagged pulses like dying heartbeats. And then I saw it. Wires weren't torn at random, they were cut. Clean, deliberate slices. Panels had been overridden with precision. This wasn't chaos, it was sabotage. My stomach knotted. I leaned closer, tracing the work with my eyes. The method was precise, patterned. Recognition struck like a hammer. Years ago, in the desert, a man I once called a comrade had shown me tricks for undermining enemy systems. Too sharp to be coincidence. I whispered to myself, almost choking on the words. It's him. The recruits fumbled, voices edging into panic as sparks popped from a panel. Harris stormed in, eyes scanning, assessing. "Contain it," he barked. They froze. And in that instant, I stepped forward. Calm orders spilled out before I had time to think. "You, vent that line. You, cut power to secondary grid. Move now." My voice carried, steady in the chaos. Instinct overruled doubt. To my surprise, they obeyed. Not flawlessly, but enough. The grid hummed back with partial stability. Harris's eyes cut to me. No praise, but the faintest shift in his expression. Acknowledgement. Then the blast came, not big enough to level us, but close enough that the walls shuddered and one recruit was thrown to the floor. The air lit in a flash of fire, smoke curling fast. Sabotage wasn't over, it was alive, pulsing through this place. My chest burned with fury. This was no accident. Whoever did this wanted it to unravel tonight, and they knew how to make it sting. Then, amid the alarms and shouts, the comm unit crackled. Static at first, then a voice, panicked and breaking. "Mayday! Help! Anyone! Please!" I froze. My lungs locked, my body went cold. That voice. I knew it. Impossible, yet unmistakable. Years of silence, buried deep, came crashing to the surface in one jagged instant. The recruits looked at me, waiting for direction. Harris barked more orders, but all I heard was that voice, calling into the dark, clawing straight out of my past. My name followed, broken through static. John Miller. The world narrowed to that sound. Orders or the past, duty or blood. The comm hissed again, then cut. I stood at the edge of choice, every scar I carried screaming with the weight of it. And for the first time in years, I didn't know which way to turn. The storm had been crawling closer all night. By the time we gathered in the communications room, the walls themselves seemed to tremble with every distant roll of thunder. The power inside was failing in weak, jittery bursts, lights flickering, shadows bending across the consoles. My ears still rang from the earlier near miss, and my palms were damp against the steel table when the static on the comms line cracked, throbbed, and then carried words that stopped my breathing cold. John, it's me, David. For a second I thought I'd imagined it. The name didn't belong here, not in this place, not in this storm, not in the mouth of a voice I hadn't heard in years. My brother's voice, older, rougher, but still threaded with the same edge I remembered. The same cadence that once shouted across backyards, across barracks, across the chasm we carved between us. I froze. Harris's head snapped toward me. The recruits stared, their eyes darting between me and the radio like they'd just stumbled into a family feud mid-battle. I couldn't even speak. The air in the room thinned until every breath burned. The static hissed again, breaking into his words. John, I don't have much time. Listen. My throat finally unlocked. David? I whispered, more to myself than to the room. Harris barked. You know this voice? His tone was sharp, suspicious. Authority demanded an answer. I kept my eyes on the radio. My chest hurt. Yes, I forced out. That's my brother. The room cracked open in disbelief. Memories I had buried clawed their way back. The last time I saw David, we weren't speaking. We were shouting. I had told him he was reckless, a disgrace to the family name. He had fired back that I was nothing but a soldier boy, too blind to see the world rotting from the inside. We split with words that poisoned everything. Him accusing me of loyalty to the wrong causes, me accusing him of betrayal. And then silence. Years of it. I'd learned to live without his voice. I told myself he was gone. By choice or by consequence, I didn't know. To hear him now, breaking through a Navy frequency on the night of a sabotage, it made no sense. Yet my heart beat with a rhythm I hadn't felt since childhood, the ache of brotherhood I swore I no longer needed. The recruits sensed my hesitation. I could feel their judgment, sharp as knives. If I couldn't stand steady, what faith could they put in me? Harris's jaw tightened. The storm outside howled, rattling the glass like it wanted in. John, David's voice came again, urgent, jagged. I'm inside the system. They've got me locked in here, forced me to work. I didn't do this, not willingly. You have to believe me. My skin prickled. Inside what? The installation. The breach. It isn't random. It's sabotage. I'm trapped inside the compromised network. I can't shut it down alone. His voice cracked with static but carried truths only a brother could speak. Details about our past, about the old codes we once carved into notebooks, about the scar on my shoulder he gave me in a backyard fight. He wasn't bluffing. He couldn't be. Yet Harris leaned over the console and spat the words I already feared. It's a trick. Enemy psyops. They know your record, Miller. They're baiting you. We cut the line. No. The word tore out of me harder than I intended. Every eye swung to me. My chest pounded like a war drum. Harris's face was iron. He's the enemy. You heard it yourself. He admits he's inside. That makes him part of this operation. End of discussion. He's not the enemy, I snapped. He's my brother. That makes it worse, Harris shot back. You're compromised. The room heated with the clash. Recruits shifted on their feet, glancing between us like they were watching a fuse burn. I felt the sting of divided loyalty, the duty drilled into me versus the blood that tied me to the voice on the line. My mind swirled with 1,000 questions. Was David truly trapped? Had he chosen this path? Or was he just another ghost from the past wearing my brother's voice? But the truth was this: I couldn't ignore him. I took a breath that tasted of rust and storm water. "I'm tracing the signal," I said, hands already moving across the console. Harris slammed his palm against the table. "That's an order you don't get to give." "Then strip me of my rank," I hissed, locking eyes with him. "But I'm not leaving my brother in the dark." The recruits wavered. Some lowered their eyes, unwilling to defy Harris. But a handful, 3, maybe 4, shifted closer to me, silent but resolute. They didn't trust me because of my name. They trusted me because I had led them through fire earlier, and they felt it too, the pulse of something real in the voice on that line. Harris's warning landed heavy. "One wrong move, Miller, and this blood is on your head." I nodded. "I'll carry it." The trace locked. My stomach flipped. The signal source was coming from inside the coastal facility, the very place under siege. The comms crackled again. "John, it's me. I swear I'm trying to fight them. I didn't choose this. They used me. I've been pulling at their system from inside, but I can't stop it alone." The words cut deeper than any blade. He sounded desperate, but beneath it was something else. Resolve. The same stubborn resolve that once made him my greatest rival and my fiercest ally. Lightning flashed outside, lighting up the comms room in an eerie white glow. I saw my reflection in the window, a soldier caught between 2 wars, one in front of me and one inside of me. Harris's voice boomed again. "Cut the feed, Miller. That's an order." David's voice rose through the static. "John, please, don't let them shut me out. I'm not your enemy. I'm your brother." The storm hit full force, rain hammering the outpost, thunder splitting the night like cannon fire. And I stood there, hand trembling over the console, my future narrowed to a single brutal crossroads: obey the command of the uniform, or trust the blood of my brother. The chapter ended not with a decision, but with the storm itself swallowing the comms room, leaving me frozen between the two. The first light of dawn was thin and pale, barely strong enough to cut through the mist curling off the sea. The storm had passed, but its shadow lingered over the abandoned coastal installation. The structure loomed like a carcass of iron and stone, corroded walls dripping with salt water, jagged edges glistening with dew. My boots echoed on the cracked concrete floor as I led the small breakaway team forward. Harris's last warning still rang in my ears, but I pushed it aside. Family or not, David's voice had reached me, and I couldn't turn my back. The air inside smelled of rust and wet earth. Machinery hummed faintly somewhere below, though most of the systems were long dead. Water dripped steadily from a broken pipe, each splash a reminder that the place was decaying around us. I steadied my breathing, hand brushing the wall, every sense sharpened. This wasn't just another mission. It was personal. The signal tracker pulsed in my hand, a slow beat that grew stronger the deeper we went. The recruits whispered among themselves. Some wanted to turn back, their nerves fraying. One muttered, "We're walking into a tomb." Another gripped his rifle tighter, sweat gleaming on his brow. I knew their fear because it was my own, but I swallowed it. Over the comms, Harris's voice cracked with static. "Miller, you're walking into a grave. Turn around before you bury us all." His tone wasn't concern, it was condemnation. I didn't answer. If I let his words in, I might falter. Instead, I kept moving, one step at a time, until the tracker glowed bright in the dim corridor. The bunker revealed itself at the end of a rust-stained stairwell. The steel door groaned when we pushed it open, hinges screeching in protest. Inside, the chamber was dim, lit only by the weak glow of a failing emergency lamp. And there he was, David. He was slumped against the wall, shackled with thick iron chains. His face was gaunt, eyes hollow but alive. Bruises mapped his skin, but when he lifted his head and our eyes met, it felt like time itself stuttered. Years of anger and silence came crashing back in a single heartbeat. "John," His voice rasped, raw from thirst and exhaustion. It's really me. My knees weakened, but I forced myself forward. The recruits froze, caught between disbelief and dread. I knelt beside him, my hand brushing the cold metal that bound him. This wasn't a trick. This wasn't a recording. My brother was here, broken, chained, and yet alive. Anger surged through me. Why, David? Why disappear? Why drag us into this hell? My voice cracked louder than I intended, filled with the bitterness I had buried for years. David's eyes glistened. I tried, John. I thought working in the shadows would let me undo what was rotting inside the system. But I failed. They caught me. They used me. His voice trembled but held a thread of conviction. I never meant to betray you. The recruits exchanged uneasy looks. One whispered, "We should treat him as the enemy." Another hissed back, "But what if he's telling the truth?" Their division mirrored my own war inside. I rose, scanning the room. That was when I saw it, small devices scattered across the chamber. Encrypted hardware, false signal emitters designed to mimic distress calls. My stomach sank. This wasn't just about David. The realization slammed into me. He was bait. Someone had set this trap, knowing I'd chase the voice of my brother. John, David's voice broke the silence. They wanted you here. You have to believe me. Before I could answer, the walls shuddered. A grinding roar filled the air, machinery springing to life. Red emergency lights flickered on, bathing the chamber in a bloody glow. Alarms blared, echoing through the installation. Self-destruct. "Move!" I shouted. The recruits scrambled, panic in their eyes. Dust rained from the ceiling, and a section of concrete cracked open with a deafening snap. I spun back to David, yanking at his chains. My hands bled as metal bit into my palms. He grabbed my wrist, his voice raw. "You have to leave me. Save your men." "No," I growled, pulling harder. "I'm not leaving you again." The recruits shouted from the stairwell, torn between escape and loyalty. Harris's voice screamed over the comms. "You've doomed us all, Miller!" The chamber trembled, groaning under its own weight. My chest burned with the weight of choice. My men needed me. My brother needed me. And for the first time in years, I refused to let go of either. With every ounce of strength, I pulled at the chains, even as the bunker collapsed around us, even as the alarms howled like dying sirens. I wasn't going to let the past win this time. The chapter closed on the sound of breaking stone, recruits screaming, Harris's rage in my ear, and my own desperate vow. I would save them both, or I would die trying. The alarm struck first. A banshee wail echoing through steel corridors as red lights pulsed in sickening rhythm, every flash painting the bunker like a dying beast. The walls groaned, rivets screamed, and dust rained down in choking clouds. A roar followed, a hollow metallic thunder rolling through the coastal installation as if the whole structure was ready to tear itself apart. "Hold your ground," I bellowed over the noise, grabbing the nearest recruit by the collar before he bolted. Their eyes were wide, pupils blown wide with panic, hands shaking on their rifles. The storm outside had nothing on the storm inside. Steel beams shuddered overhead. I could hear the groan of a tunnel giving way somewhere deep within. My men looked to me like lost children, and I forced my own fear down, caging it beneath orders. "Form up, 2 by 2, eyes sharp. No running blind unless you want to be buried under this tomb." But my gaze kept flicking back to David. My brother was barely standing, slumped against the wall, his wrists raw where the chains had been cut. His legs gave out every few steps, and I had to sling his arm around my shoulders, hauling him forward like a sack of stone. His skin was clammy, breath shallow, eyes hollow but flickering with the remnants of fire. "Leave me," he rasped, coughing blood onto his sleeve. "Save them. Don't carry me into your grave." The words cut like shrapnel. He wanted me to abandon him, again, and maybe duty demanded I should. But I couldn't. Not after years of silence, after the bitterness, after the memory of the last time I turned my back on him. Not here, not now. "Shut up and move," I growled, dragging him forward. I didn't come all this way to bury another ghost. We barely made 20 paces before the shadows bled out of the walls. Figures in black tactical gear surged from side passages, weapons raised. The tunnel ahead lit with the green dots of their lasers. Their leader stepped forward, voice calm, cruel. John Miller, the Navy's dutiful son, walked right into the cage with his lambs. He smirked, gesturing to the recruits. And all because you couldn't resist chasing family. Cover, I roared. My recruits scrambled into firing positions, their rifles clattering against crumbling barricades. The first burst of gunfire shredded the corridor, ricochets sparking off steel. I shielded David with my body, pressing him against the wall, teeth gritted as concrete dust showered down. This was no accident. This was the trap. David had been bait. And yet... John, David wheezed, gripping my sleeve with surprising strength. His eyes locked on mine, clearer than they'd been since I found him. They think I'm broken, but I listened. I memorized what they hid in the codes. I know the override. What override? I snapped, firing a burst down the tunnel, forcing the operatives back behind cover. The lockdown. There's a secondary passage. Behind the generator shaft. I can open it. His words tumbled fast, urgent. You have to trust me. Trust. That poisoned word. But then his fingers flew across a console embedded in the wall. His body trembled, every keystroke tearing at his strength. Alarms shifted pitch. With a hiss, a bulkhead in the distance shuddered, then began to rise. A new path yawned open, glowing faint in the chaos. He had done it. He had bought us a chance. Move, I barked at the recruits, shoving them toward the opening. That's our way out. Gunfire flared again. 2 men stumbled under the barrage, but others dragged them up, adrenaline drowning their fear. The tunnel behind us groaned louder, fissures splitting across the ceiling. Water burst from broken pipes, flooding the floor ankle-deep, then waist-deep, swirling with oil and debris. I hoisted David higher, nearly losing him twice as his weight sagged against me. Each time I clutched tighter, refusing to let go. He wasn't bait. Not anymore. He was my brother. We pressed into the new passage, the air thick with smoke, bullets snapping past our ears. The installation shook like an earthquake, walls buckling. Somewhere above, fire licked through vents, lighting the water with hellish reflections. Then came the final sprint. We crashed into a corridor, half submerged, water surging around our waists. The recruits moved as one, lifting David between them when my strength faltered, their fear forged into something harder. Teamwork, loyalty. The ceiling began to cave. Steel beams plunged into the flood with explosive splashes. A shaft loomed ahead, the last escape, its ladder slick and rusted but open. Go! Go now! I shouted. One by one, the recruits scrambled up, dragging each other, shoving from below. The roar of collapse chased us, louder, closer. Fire, water, and death converged in the same breath. I slung David across my shoulders, legs screaming under his weight, lungs burning. With one final surge, I leapt for the ladder, hauling us both into the shaft as the corridor behind us caved in with a roar like the end of the world. The installation swallowed itself in a storm of fire and steel. Then, silence. I clung to the ladder in the dark, David's shallow breath against my neck, my men above us panting ragged, alive. For now, the cost was written in sweat, blood, and fear, but we had made it out. The future beyond that shaft was uncertain, but one thing was carved deep inside me. I would not let him go again. The first taste of air outside the installation was salt and smoke. I dragged myself out of the escape shaft on elbows that barely held, boots scraping rock until I tumbled into wet sand. The horizon burned faint red with the first hint of dawn. Behind us, the coastal ruin groaned as if the sea itself had swallowed it. Steel twisted, breaking apart with echoes that carried all the way up the cliffs. One by one, the others crawled out after me. Their eyes were glassy, hollow, too tired for words. Relief was there, sure, but it was buried under exhaustion, grief, and the sharp sting of doubt. Nobody spoke at first. We just lay there in silence, hearing the surf roll and crash, feeling the air that didn't stink of rust and oil. Freedom tasted fragile, like it might vanish if we exhaled too loudly. I turned and found David. He was barely conscious, lips cracked, face pale under streaks of grime. His chains had left deep marks across his wrists. Every breath from him was shallow, fragile, and wrong. I ripped the sleeve from my shirt and bound the worst of the wounds. My hands shook the whole time, though I forced them steady. "Easy," I muttered, as if words could patch bone and blood. His eyes flickered open for a heartbeat, recognition slipping through like a candle in the wind. Then he drifted away again. Around us, murmurs began. Two of the younger recruits, Torres and Nguyen, leaned close enough for me to hear. "Should have left him," one whispered. "We'd all be better off," the other muttered back. The words cut, but I didn't answer. I just tightened the cloth around David's arm and kept my head down. The storm broke not in the sky, but in the circle of survivors. "You dragged us into hell for him," Torres spat, voice rising. "That place was wired to collapse, and who was at the center of it? Him, your brother." Others nodded, tired eyes suddenly sharp with anger. "We followed you because you were Navy, because you were solid, but you put us all in a coffin just to save family." I stood, every muscle aching, but forced my voice into steel. "He was chained, beaten, used as bait. You saw that." "Or maybe he let it happen," Nguyen shot back. "Maybe the whole thing was staged. You ever think of that? Maybe he lured us in." It wasn't just accusation, it was demand. They wanted me to pick, blood or duty, the group or my brother. I looked down at David. He stirred weakly, eyes clouded. "Maybe they're right," he whispered, so quiet only I caught it. "Maybe this is on me." For a second, I saw him not as the broken man in chains, but as the boy I grew up with, the one who never stopped testing fences, who jumped first and thought later. I clenched my fists. "Don't you dare! Don't you take their blame just because it's easier." Before anyone could fire back, a voice cut through. "Signal, I've got something." One of the recruits, Patel, held up a battered comms device pulled from the rubble. Static hissed, cracked, then shifted into rhythm. Bursts of coded sound. I froze. I knew that cadence. Not random, not ambient. Command-grade encryption. We huddled close, listening. The message was faint but undeniable. The collapse sequence had been triggered remotely. Higher command, somewhere above all of us, had pulled the switch. Not David, not the recruits. Orders from men in shadows. The group's silence was thicker than any argument. For a moment I thought relief might come, but mistrust doesn't vanish that fast. "So what?" Torres said at last, bitter. Even if command triggered it, he was still part of it. "Look at him. You really trust that?" Some nodded, others didn't. A fracture opened in the sand right there between us. One side staring at David with suspicion that no message could erase. The other glancing to me, waiting for orders, scared but willing to follow. I realized then that survival wouldn't come from the sea or the sunrise. It would come from me, from whether I could hold this group together when everything, including blood, was tearing it apart. I rose, feeling the weight of command settle heavier than the pack on my shoulders. "Listen to me," I said, voice raw but loud enough to cut the surf. "We made it out because we worked together, not because of me, not because of him, because all of us kept moving. If we start tearing each other apart now, we're already dead." No one answered, but no one walked away. That was enough, for now. I turned east. The horizon bled red gold across the water, calm waves carrying the reflection of fire. My men lay behind me, half broken, half mistrustful. My brother breathed shallow at my feet, shame mixed with something like hope. And beyond all of it, out there past the line of dawn, I felt the weight of whoever had sent that message. The storm hadn't ended, it had only just begun. The night smelled of rust and salt as we crept along the dunes. The moon hid behind heavy clouds, and the abandoned Naval Command facility loomed ahead like a corpse of steel and concrete. My boots sank into wet sand, each step muffled but heavy with intent. I kept my hand tight on the rifle sling across my chest, not for comfort but for certainty. Behind me, the survivors followed in silence, faces gaunt, eyes burning with something between fear and fury. David was among them. He should have been resting, but of course he refused. His gait was uneven, breath ragged, but he walked with me as though that stubborn streak alone held his body together. For weeks we had carried one another through collapse and betrayal. Tonight we would carry the weight of judgment. Every creak of the rusted fence felt like a signal, every gust of wind a warning. The facility had been abandoned for years, but power still pulsed through its veins. Faint lights blinked in the distance, like dying embers that refused to fade. We moved through broken gates, past overturned vehicles, past slogans peeling off concrete walls that once promised loyalty and strength. At the far end of the courtyard, we found it, the sealed command chamber. A thick blast door, reinforced and scarred from time, still hummed with power. The youngest recruit in our group placed a trembling hand on the panel. The door hissed, then unlocked with a groan that echoed across the empty halls. Inside, screens flickered. Dust floated in the stale air. And waiting for us, seated calmly at the center console, was a man in a commander's uniform. His hair was silver, his eyes sharp, his face etched with both exhaustion and smugness. "I knew you'd come," he said, voice cool as steel. No one moved. No one breathed. My pulse hammered in my ears. He leaned forward, a thin smile cutting across his face. "You think you've uncovered something. You think dragging your half-dead brother here means victory, but you don't even know the game you've been playing." I stepped closer, rifle raised. "Then tell me, who's been pulling the strings?" His laugh was soft, bitter. "Not your brother. He was bait, always bait. The real prize has been you, John Miller." The words struck like a hammer. I felt the group behind me shift in confusion, suspicion. David staggered forward, eyes wide, whispering, "No, it was me they wanted. It was always me." The commander's gaze hardened. "No, David. You were the decoy, the one we dangled so the elder brother would reveal himself. John, the Navy veteran, the loyal son, the one too stubborn to break. That defiance is a contagion, a threat. We needed to root it out." The air turned heavier than lead. Memories of years in service, of battles fought in deserts and seas, of my father's grave, all of it swirled into a single point of betrayal. I was not just fighting corruption, I was the target of it. The commander rose to his feet. With a click, the chamber sealed shut, steel doors slamming into place. Red lights flared, alarms howled. We were caged. "This is your tomb," he said. "No one will ever know your story. You'll vanish, and the order will remain." For a heartbeat, despair clawed at my chest. But then I remembered the device we had salvaged, the coded fragment of truth. My hand moved before fear could stop it. I shoved past the consoles, fingers dancing across keys, rerouting systems I had once trained to obey. Static filled the speakers. The commander's voice barked orders, threats, curses, but then his own words, his confession, bled out through the comm system. Not just in the room, across the coast, across every outpost still clinging to order. His admission that I was the true target, his boasts of silencing us, his smirk of control, it all broadcast live. Outside, chaos erupted. Through the crackle of speakers we heard shouts, defections, units breaking ranks. The truth was spreading faster than his lies ever had. The commander lunged at me, fury replacing smugness. We collided, metal ringing as we fought across the chamber. His strength was born of rage, mine of survival. We traded blows, the others fighting security drones in the corners, the room drenched in sparks and smoke. Finally, I pinned him against the console. His eyes met mine, still burning with conviction. "You can kill me," he hissed, "but you cannot kill the order." I tightened my grip on the blade I had carried since the collapse. "No," I said, voice steady, "but I can end the chain that kept it alive." And then I drove the blade home. He gasped, staggered, then fell, dragging the last of that poisoned empire with him. The alarms died. The doors unlocked. For the first time in years, silence felt like freedom. We emerged into dawn, The sky was pale, streaked with fire, but it was ours. Survivors stumbled out with me, broken but unbowed. David limped forward and clasped my hand, fingers trembling. No words were needed. The grip said everything: reconciliation, brotherhood, survival. I stood on the shore, staring at the horizon as the sun rose. My body ached, my heart carried scars I could never erase, but my resolve was iron. The system had burned, the order had fallen, and the truth, our truth, was no longer buried. Somewhere beyond the waves, the future waited. And I knew now, more than ever, that as long as someone dared to fight for it, the truth would endure. Looking back on everything I've lived through, I realize one truth that never changes. Systems can rise and fall, people can betray you, but courage and integrity never go out of style. I carried scars from battles at sea and scars from battles within my own family, yet the lesson is the same. If you stand tall for what's right, even when the cost is high, you leave behind a legacy that no one can erase. Maybe my fight looks different than yours. For me, it was a commander in a locked chamber. For you, it might be a dishonest boss, a broken promise, or the quiet fear of not being enough. But the test is universal. Do you let the world silence you, or do you rise and claim your truth? Now I want to hear from you. What battles are you fighting in your own life? Do you believe justice is something we make for ourselves or something we wait for others to deliver? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading them. If this story spoke to you, type 1 below or tell me where you're watching from. And if you didn't like it, be honest and share why. Most importantly, if this story touched your heart, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next journey we take together. Because in the end, stories like these aren't just about me, they're about us. About reminding each other that even in the darkest nights, there's always a dawn worth fighting for.